5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All righty, we're online. Mark, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm wearing pants too, just in case anybody's wondering. I'm actually wearing pants right now.
Mark Whitney.
That's my first question for everybody who's on Zoom and Skype and everything these days. Are you wearing pants?
It's a very that and where do you get a good haircut now? You know.
Okay, haircuts. You got to get. I called my haircut guy, and he normally charges me about $75. I offered him $150 to come over to the house, and he said his scissors are locked in the shop.
Well, I'm more disturbed that you spend $75 for a haircut.
Well, you know, this is San Diego. You got to look good.
Mark Whitney is, believe it or not, if he's being straight with me, he is running for president of the United States here in 2020. Tell me about that.
That's always good for some laughs, you know, when you're on the before the virus, I was playing 737s all over the country, and people go, "Oh, what the guy sitting next to you is like, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm running for president." He turns to his wife, and is like, "Hey, Mary, this guy over here thinks he's running for president."
well, tell me about this. When I was a kid, and the first time I voted, I remember it well. I was 18 years old, and I even thought to myself, wow, you can be president someday. And then about a year later, I thought to myself, no, wake up. So what happened to you, Mark? Did you fall and hit your head, and you still think you can do it?
Oh, well, the Libertarian Party is interesting because people don't realize that when it comes to the office of the president, the United States is already a three-party system. The Libertarian Party is the only party that has access to all ballot access in all 50 states. So when you run for president as a Libertarian, if you're the nominee, which I am not yet, but if I am the nominee, my name will be printed on the ballot in all 175,000 voting precincts, just like President Pornstar and Joe Biden, who I think is missing a step or two, isn't he? I think he is.
President Pornstar. So you will be on the ballot this fall, is what you're saying?
If I'm the nominee of the party. So the way it works with the Libertarian Party, under normal circumstances, you travel all over the country and you attend state conventions where you debate your opponents. And these are really beauty contests. It's an opportunity for delegates from those states to get to know the candidates. And there are straw polls and so forth that are non-binding. But then there's an annual convention, which this year is scheduled for the week of May 21st in Austin, Texas. It's still scheduled. It's still meant to happen. And what happens at that convention is about 1,100 delegates from all over the country, prorated by state, come together. There's the highlight of the convention is a 2-hour debate on C-SPAN. There are about 20 libertarians running for the nomination. So there's a pre-convention debate in Austin, and the delegates choose the top 5. They vote for the top 5 who are in the C-SPAN debate, and then immediately following that, they sit there and they keep voting until one of the candidates has 50% plus one vote, and that person becomes the nominee.
So where do you honestly feel like you fall within all the libertarian candidates? Who's your biggest competitor? Who are you worried about?
There's this guy named Jacob that nobody's ever heard of outside of libertarian circles, and me, and I think it's going to be me or him. However, I got to put an asterisk by that because I don't think this convention is going to happen. And the bylaws of our party, the alternative to that is that the Libertarian National Committee chooses a candidate. So right now they're talking about maybe postponing a convention until July or August. Like the Democrats just postponed their convention until August, moved it from July. So here, this is how I feel right now. I feel like I'm at the airport waiting to get on the plane, and they told me the plane is 15 minutes late. And a half an hour goes by, and they tell me the plane is going to be an hour late. And then an hour and a half goes by, and they tell me there's a gate change. And then you get down to the gate, and another hour goes by, and they tell you the flight crew's been killed in a plane crash. That's how I feel right now. I don't know what's going to happen, but I just keep running. So what's happening is I'm debating my opponents on the internet using Zoom and things like that, and libertarian podcasters are moderating these debates. And I don't know where it's going to land, but I just keep running as if things are normal, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's talk about this upcoming race. I'm hearing nothing from the Democratic candidates anymore.
Right.
Obviously, we hear from Trump because he's got the stage to himself. I don't hear anything from the Libertarian parties. Is this a case that, yeah, we're going to maybe get these little conventions in, and the current president is just going to, everyone's going to go, we don't really want to change things. All right, the economy's now getting back a little bit, and we don't want to rock the boat. Because it kind of reminds me of around 9/11. Remember, we didn't want to change administrations. You don't want to, you don't want to shake things up. This is not the time to switch presidents.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking that Trump would win in a landslide anyway, unless I was the nominee. I think that's even more true now. Even without the virus, I mean, the Democrats went ahead and it looks like they're going to nominate Biden. And, Biden, I was watching one debate Biden was in, and his teeth came loose. He was trying to keep his teeth in while he was answering. Then another debate, another question, another time he was getting interviewed on CNN, and his eye exploded. That's not a good sign. Parts start falling off. And then another time he came out and said he was going to put 720 million women back to work, and we only have 120 million women. So, the way I position it is that the two mainstream parties are running these fringe candidates. Fringe in the sense that they're ancient. I mean, it's like running against Statler and Waldorf from the Muppet Show, Heckle Fozzie Bear. That's kind of what I think about when I look at these two guys. I'm like, and then over here, the Libertarian Party, if I'm the nominee, I talk about things like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, privacy, the 14th Amendment, how great it is that it doesn't see sexual preference so we can have gay marriage. I talk about libertarianism really, is keep your nose out of other people's business and don't spend money you don't have. That's kind of it. And it's kind of just normal, mainstream stuff. And, I complain that the Democrats and Republicans have put a second steering wheel on the Bill of Rights to such an extent that it's unrecognizable, and that a libertarian president would help cure that.
Yeah, you're right on that. You gave some thoughts about Joe Biden. What do you think about Bernie Sanders?
Well, I'm from Vermont. I've known Bernie for 30 years. Everybody in Vermont knows Bernie. Bernie has been saying the same thing since he was mayor of Burlington, Vermont. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And so I think the appeal of Bernie for a lot of people is the same thing, same reason Trump appeals to a lot of people. Whatever else you can say about Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, you know exactly what you're getting with these two guys. Trump is unchanged by the presidency. He's the exact same guy he was before that. Half of, he uses skin color as dog whistles. He makes fun of Gold Star families. He does all these horrendous things. But he's not a hypocrite. And when people think of politicians, especially in Congress, we're dealing with a lot of hypocrites. We deal with a lot of people who claim to be someone other than who they are. And authenticity and confidence, really, people will follow that just because they feel like, okay, Trump, yeah, I can trust that fraud. He may be a fraud, but he's our fraud. And I understand he's a fraud. At least he's honest about being a fraud. And the same thing with Bernie. Bernie might be a socialist. He might have all these ideas. He can have all this free stuff and keep running the deficit up and the debt up. But he's honest about it, so they get a lot of traction.
It's interesting. I remember when I was younger, they used to call Ronald Reagan the Teflon president. Isn't really Donald Trump the Teflon president? I think everything just bounces off him, and it doesn't matter. And I don't think we've ever seen that in my lifetime like that.
Yeah, I mean the Amazon Post has been counting lies, and the New York Times the same thing. They have forgotten they are blind to Donald Trump's massive talent. I'm someone who's been on my feet, running my mouth for 40 years in every kind of environment. I've been a comedian for 15 years. I toured one-man shows all over North America and the UK. And I bow and genuflect at Donald Trump's ability to adjust to different venues and tell a story. He always has an enemy. He's always in character 100% of the time. So there's a reason this guy vanquished. Remember Jeb Bush would be up there. Jeb Bush spent $100 million to get 4 delegates. Jeb Bush would be up there, and Trump would call him low energy Jeb, right?
Yeah, right.
And so then the next day, Jeb would show up with a little more energy, and Trump would go, "Oh, a little more energy today. I like that." So these guys, they don't know what to do with him. And the presidency is unique. I mean, hosting The Apprentice for 14 years is terrific training for being president of the United States. And the Wall Street traded media, they sneer at it and they make fun of it. And they keep counting lies. But it's amazing to see, even people in the New York Times not understand the difference between satire and hyperbole and a lie and just very good political rhetoric. So unless you can assess objectively your opponent, you have no chance of beating him.
So that's a good point. You're running for president of the United States. How are you going to beat Donald Trump?
By using all the tools of a master storyteller. So, like I said, I've been a comedian for 15 years. I am a great storyteller. I've shared the cover of Story magazine with Russell Brand and Drew Carey. I owned a comedy club for 5 years. So here's one criticism I have of Donald Trump. He's an open mic comic. And one of the jokes I say is that, I'm running for president because America deserves a better joke. So he has been able to get away with becoming president through the use of confidence and his ability on his feet and his ability to be authentic. But where he is weak is that, if I bring in a group of a diffuse group of 100 Americans just spit out by a bingo machine and they show up in a room and I hold this Bill of Rights up and I say, we all know the president has never read this document. Everybody is going to agree with that. And that's a problem. Donald Trump is a very unconstitutional president. He follows in the footsteps of Obama and the two Bushes in that regard. He has killed U.S. citizens with missiles just like Obama has, just like Obama did. And he's perpetuated the aggressive war. And it's even more secretive now. He's kept the war machine over in the CIA where Obama moved it. And the New York Times and Washington Post have been so preoccupied fact-checking hyperbole that they haven't really been covering the aggressive wars that the United States is waging around the world. And I've said that when I am president, I will sign the Rome Statute, which will make the United States a party to the International Criminal Court. And this business of attacking with impunity countries who have never attacked the United States, that will come to a screeching halt once U.S. nationals and U.S. officials are accountable to the International Criminal Court. That's how we get away with doing this nonsense that we do.
Well, and it is a lot of nonsense because if you wonder why there's so much hate for America in so many countries, I don't think most Americans realize, again, President Obama, the king of drone strikes, and like you said, killing a lot of individuals. And this has been going on in America for a lot of years, just random killings to try to get to what we call as the bad guys, but with no authorization of war, with nothing informing the American public about this. It's secretive. And, this is why we have so many hostile nations towards America. People think it's because we have shopping malls and because we have a nice way of life. It isn't. It's how we take sides.
That's true. I'm the only citizen who sued a president to end participation of U.S. armed forces in a foreign civil war. When I was at my home in Vermont.
Didn't you sue Obama? Didn't you go?
I did, yeah. In 2011, I was sitting in my house in Vermont, and my wife and I had a little second home there. And this guy comes on TV, this Harvard constitutional professor, and he starts talking about limited kinetic actions, how these things aren't wars. And he woke up one day and literally just started participating with U.S. armed forces through NATO in the foreign civil war that was going on in Libya, and there was no budget for it. There was no authorization from Congress. In fact, Congress passed a resolution saying you can't do this, and he did it anyway. So I filed a suit, and the lawsuit eventually was dismissed as moot because Gaddafi had been killed before the litigation could end. But we had him on the ropes on the merits. I mean, Obama's lawyers from the Department of Justice argued that what they were doing in Libya was not war. And even if it was, who's to really say? Because the U.S. Supreme Court has never defined the word war. I mean, they actually argued that.
Well, do you think, because you're running for president, do you think it's possible, if you would win this, okay, do you think there's things in the White House you get in there and they sit you down and there's just so much you don't know that Every president now in modern times does this, says they're going to change things, exactly what you were talking about. Then they get in office and they do the same exact thing as the other guy did. So is it possible we just don't know of all the threats out there and the way they threaten American lives?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because that as the first libertarian president, if I were to be elected, between the time I'm elected and the time I took the oath, I would need a lot of private security to keep me alive beyond the Secret Service. You think the world exploded when Donald Trump got elected. If Mark Whitney becomes the president, he's a libertarian, a couple of things happen. So would you talk about the things you don't know? Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff we don't know. Here's something we know that we didn't know. A few years back, Julian Assange dropped a tranche of documents on Wikipedia. One of them was a transcript of a speech that Henry Kissinger gave back when he was Secretary of State with Nixon. And he was giving a speech to his fellow diplomats after, I assume, a bad chicken dinner somewhere around the world. And he gets up and he raises his glass and he says, and mind you, he's bragging. He said, "The illegal we do right away, the unconstitutional takes a little more time." So when you think about the things that we know, a brick bat that the president has, all presidents have this brick bat, because the people delegated authority to the president to be able to declassify state secrets. So that's a hammer that a libertarian president has. So I want my team to dig through the records, and I bet you we find out that Mitch McConnell has a relationship with a Girl Scout going on. And that's how you get Mitch McConnell to do business and get some bad laws repealed and get some of this unconstitutional conduct brought under control. A president has that brick bat. And I'm one of these people who's just hardwired. And to the extent I have any struggles in my competition to become the libertarian nominee, it's because I may be too libertarian for libertarians. I mean, I am hardwired to want to get up every day for 4 years and see a wet spot form in the pants of Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, because I'm wielding this brick bat. I'm threatening to declassify state secrets if they don't do business.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
I wish you the best. So people listening to us and watching us, every time I hear a libertarian talk, I realize I have a lot of issues that I believe in libertarianism. I am, many of my views fall into that category. But then there are times that I find the libertarian view just goes too far. So how do you define a libertarian? Is it just let people do whatever they want? Here's a weird one. And I don't know if this was a libertarian view. I remember when they were going to allow, require you to have seatbelts in cars. Okay?
Yeah.
I was a real little kid. It was this huge deal. Hey man, you ain't gonna tell me that I gotta buckle up in my car, blah, 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 blah. We had the same thing with, I think, motorcycle helmets in a lot of states. Yeah. And from my viewpoint, I think to myself, no, the real reason is if I get in an accident with you and you go through the windshield, I don't want you to fall on me, I don't want your body coming through
it's
my windshield. Yeah. And so how do you define a libertarian? What is it?
Like I said, to me, it's just ninth grade civics. It's don't spend money you don't have. Keep your nose out of other people's business. I'm applying for the job of president. This is the job description. Article 2 tells me what the job is. So when I read the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, for example, actually create anarchy in the United States as the text is written. So here's an example. If you, Randy, are the only guy in the country who decides you want to have a house full of guns, and all 300 million of your fellow citizens are against you, the Second Amendment commands me to defend you, Randy. In the same instance, if it's two men or two women who wanted to get married, the 14th Amendment commands me to defend those people, that couple, because the 14th Amendment is blind to sexual preference. It sees only citizens. So if you're two citizens and you want to get married, you get denied a marriage license. The 14th Amendment says, I should defend you. If you have a very unpopular political opinion, the First Amendment says, I, as the president, my job is to defend you. If you want to start some religion So I was raised Catholic. I remember being an altar boy. And by the way, I was never molested by a priest. And that messed me up for a few years. I was wondering what's wrong with me.
You're offended.
I was really. But I remember being like in the 5th grade and looking up, and the logo, for the Catholic Church is a guy nailed to two 2x4s. I'm like, that's your corporate identity program?
It's bizarre, isn't it?
So that is the normal religion, right? So I say, if you're going to start some wacko religion that doesn't have a dead guy nailed to 2x4s, my job as president is to defend you.
Right.
But there is an anarchy wing in the Libertarian Party where people just want to roll up the United States of America. They're anarchists. They call themselves voluntarists, and just everything is just sort of people just decide among themselves. But there's no precedent for that. So, as an artist and an entrepreneur, and also I might add that I have a 30-year-old felony conviction from the late 80s where I started a chain of Ben & Jerry's stores in Vermont. I gave a couple of tax returns to the bank that were not what they appeared to be. So I actually represented myself in that trial because they appointed a real estate lawyer to represent me. So, as president, I believe it's my job to uphold the 6th Amendment right to counsel, which is in the Bill of Rights. The people delegated that authority to the government to do that. So one of the things I would do as a libertarian, I would actually grow government in this area. I would move the federal public defender from the Department of Justice, make it a cabinet office, and put a spotlight on that office so that people understand when we go about our business of trying to put people in cages, which we do incredibly well in this country.
Well, let's talk about that felony conviction though, real quick. It was because you didn't you thought as a young man you didn't have to file taxes too, wasn't it?
Well, that is true. I listened to a guy who was a very popular radio host in the 70s and 80s named Irwin Schiff, who ultimately went on to become a Libertarian presidential candidate in 1996. But Irwin used to go on the radio and tell people you didn't have to pay your taxes. And I first heard Irwin when I was 22 years old in Boston. He was actually a guest in the same building where I worked in TV. And I said to myself, well, one less thing,
Did you really think you didn't have to pay taxes? Did you really think that in your head?
I actually thought I had a defense, is what I thought.
Okay.
So I did. So I didn't file tax returns for a couple of years. And then when I went out and borrowed money to build the Ben & Jerry's, I gave them tax returns that accurately reflected what I had made those years, but the returns hadn't been filed. So when I did get around to filing the returns with penalties and interest and stuff like that, I owed IRS over $1 million. But I used my learning from my experience with the federal justice system to talk them down to $20,000. I got my term of imprisonment declared unconstitutional by Stephen Breyer, who's now in the U.S. Supreme Court. And I've been making my living selling the law to lawyers through a company I started called thelaw.net that helps just regular lawyers on Main Street do their legal research for their clients in a very low-cost way. So my company really levels the playing field for lawyers in small offices who are litigating against big corporations and big government.
Well, I don't think this is going to hurt you because at least you allow everyone to see your taxes compared to some presidents, right?
Yeah, it's not very exciting. Yeah, I mean, the president is if you run for Congress or you run for the federal legislature, you do have to disclose your tax returns. Presidential candidates do not have to do that, and Trump has been able to get elected without disclosing his tax returns. So why would he? I mean, if Trump were to disclose his tax returns, they could be completely perfect. And there's no reason to think that they aren't. I mean, he's never had a problem with the IRS, right?
Right.
But what would happen there, and I think he knew this, is that the press would go through those tax returns with a fine-tooth comb, and they're going to make political hay out of whatever is on that tax return. And so you're never going to see his tax returns for that reason. And I think he'll get reelected in a cakewalk unless I'm the nominee. And I'm serious about that. I mean, we've got some good lawsuits ready to go that will put me on the presidential debate stage if I can poll at 15%. But so much of what I'm talking about right now has really been has really been made questionable by the presence of this virus that everybody's contending with. So who knows where things are going to land? It makes it more difficult for somebody like me. When Joe Biden can't get attention, it makes it that much more difficult for somebody like me to get attention. And I have a great story to tell the Wall Street traded media. I think there are a lot of journalists going to look at my libertarian life story, the story of my family, and be thinking Pulitzer Prize. But there's no bigger story than the virus, which has canceled baseball and basketball and the Olympics and pushed back political conventions. We really are witnessing our common humanity here. Big time musicians who tour and fill stadiums, are doing live streams from home on Zoom and Skype like we're doing. And it's kind of cool in that regard. I'm somebody who thinks there's always more opportunity and adversity than there is downside. And I'm excited to see how this ship rights itself on the other side of this nightmare.
Do you remember the term fiscal conservative?
Right.
Being fiscally responsible.
Sure.
Is that just gone? Is that?
That's not a thing. That's not a thing anymore. I mean, the word conservative even is very ambiguous, as is the word liberal and progressive.
Yeah.
Those are very ambiguous terms. But so like I said, I've been an entrepreneur a long time. The only time I lost a business is when it was funded with debt. So everything I've started since then which has been, producing a very successful podcast, producing a very successful one-man company that tours shows, producing a successful software company that has had 80 quarters, 20 years of consistent profit, and then raising two sons have done the same with their businesses. We bootstrap. We Whitneys do not spend money we don't have. We don't go to the bank. We don't borrow money. We just keep rolling the cash over and building the company that way. So I am, if you'll pardon the pun, constitutionally incapable of wrapping my mind around the idea that the largest corporation in the world, the United States of America, ever needs to spend money it doesn't have. So on the one hand, all of the money is pretend. It's just, the whole system works on trust, right? You trust the bank to give you your money back when you ask for it. We trust that when you give me a $20 bill, it's not counterfeit, but it's just paper. It's just a currency of exchange. It could be like the comic strip BC where we just exchange clamshells, but we agree to exchange this paper money. And in the last month, the government has increased its budget by 50%. That $2 trillion spending bill, the average age of an American citizen is 38. The average age of Congress is 58. The average age of death is 78. So a 38-year-old, the average American adult, is going to be paying interest on $16,000, which is that adult's prorated share of this $2 trillion borrowing bill, I call it, not a spending bill. And that's not enough for Nancy Pelosi. She wants to put another $2 trillion out. I saw Bernie Sanders on the news last night saying everybody should get their full salary until the virus is over. Look, the world doesn't work that way.
So when we look at these checks going to people's homes, as a libertarian, does this concern you? This $2 trillion and the printing press is going 24/7? I mean, I have not seen one reporter stand up in the White House and go, where's this money coming from? Not one.
Well, the other question is, why do people need $2,000? Why are people so broke? People.
Well, why? Because people spend.
People do. People do. I have a joke in my show that says, the entire system is built on people spending money, people buying stuff they don't need with money they don't have, and that is true. Are you still there, by the way?
I'm here. Yep.
Okay, I thought you might have dropped out. So that is all true. On the flip side, when you add, the amount of money that we pay in federal and state taxes together with the amount of money we pay in private sector insurance premiums, if you have a small business, workers' comp rates are very usurious. We do live in a corporate state. We do have a government that is owned by a small handful of large corporations. We have spent since the events of September 11, 2001, more than $5 trillion on bombing countries that have never bombed us. So there are a lot of escapades that go on. And so I'm a big fan of personal responsibility. The reason I was able to turn my life around from having sat in a federal prison 30 years ago, is by taking responsibility. And so there's something that I talk about called money abuse. So I think the culture of our society from the government down is one of money abuse, and we don't consider money as something that can be abused like drugs or alcohol or gambling. But I believe that it is something that can be abused and is abused, and so fiscal
responsibility.
Yeah, fiscal responsibility and being informed about money is the thing that really defined the culture of my family after I blew everything up when my two sons were just 4 and 5 years old. And as a result, both of my sons became self-made millionaires before they were 35, without any family money, without going to the bank, without borrowing. One of them did it mostly through savings. He's very good at this one particular job, so he makes a lot of money. And then my other son is autistic, and he started an Amazon business when he was 18, and then at his peak it was doing like $15 million, but he never borrowed a dime.
But let me ask you this, Mark. Do you think we might be looking back at this, handing out checks? I mean, are we going to look back at this like we did with 2 unpaid wars? Where we're going, what the hell are we doing?
We, the people, cannot let that happen. So what happened? The groundwork for this was laid in 2008, where it started to become normalized that when everything hits the fan, we write checks. So
but the Republicans didn't vote for. They didn't want to hand the money out.
Right, but they did, and now they understand that this is the new normal. This is what people expect. So we have come, we the people have come to expect that when there's a hurricane, the president is going to show up and give us a hug. When there's a shooting, the president is going to show up and give us a hug. When there's something that causes a financial nightmare, checks are going to appear in the mail. And that is the wrong answer. The reason it's the wrong answer is because it keeps you just comfortable enough that you don't look for the opportunity in the adversity. So you're missing out on the opportunity. And if people get a check for $2,000, I got news for you. That's not going to make a dent. I was talking on my show yesterday, Live at 5, a Facebook show I do 5 days a week, that what you should be doing right now, I said, look, what I'm talking about right now, one person is going to listen and say it's going to change their life. I said, go out tomorrow and start a business. You're going to start a business. It's going to be a service business. There are people all around you who need services, and you're going to contact 10 people a day this week. By the end of the week, you will contact 50 people, and you're going to have at least 5 relationships. And you're going to feel like you're in control of your life. I said, assume starting right now that we're going to be in this situation for another year, and assume that the government has nothing for you, because they don't. They're going to give you they might send you $2,000, but most of that $16,000 you're going to be paying debt on for the next 40 years is going to go to their friends. It's going to be a power grab, and we the people are going to have to get a handle on this. And a libertarian president would reinstate separation of powers between the legislature and the executive immediately.
So Mark, if you were president right now, would you hand out these checks?
No, I would not. I also would be honest with people in terms of where my authority starts and stops. And I would do the same if I was a governor. I would say, look, here, these are guidelines. We've got a situation going on here. Because I'm president, it just so happens I've got access to some of the best scientists and doctors in the world. If there was no government anywhere in the world, we would all know that as moral citizens, the thing to do is self-isolate during this time. It was literally in the run-up to this virus. It was literally my job every day to go to an airport, get on a plane, hang out in hotel lobbies, and this is key, make sure I shake every hand. That was my job.
Right. You're kind of out of work now.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, though.
If I'm not radioactive, who is, right?
Yeah. And I want to stick with this fiscal issue. Is there a tipping point? Now I think our debt is maybe now at 24 trillion or something.
Right.
Is there a tipping point where the United States will no longer become the reserve currency and other countries are going to go, look, they could never pay this money back, and that dollar really isn't worth what it's said to be?
I think there is a tipping point. I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I think the future is Bitcoin. I think the future is digital money. I think it's going to be similar to the hard currency that the United States had, the gold standard, which was disintermediated by the Federal Reserve Act of 1913.
Right.
I mean, the fact is that the United States has the ability to just print this paper and then effectively tax people by paying interest on this fake money. That's not sustainable. We're seeing, what happens when people have credit cards in their pocket. Eventually, something happens in their lives that they need to use those credit cards. And that's what our government has been doing. That has to change. So I'm excited about the possibility of living in a world where there is one world currency. It's electronic, it's open source, and we don't pay commissions to trade with each other. We have free trade between the world's people. And I think the potential of that world is tremendous. My youngest son, when he started his Amazon business, he invented an Xbox repair kit, and he needed to have replacement parts manufactured. And the way he got that done was he had a friend named Wilson, who he made friends with on the internet playing video games. And Wilson lived in Beijing, and Wilson hooked him up with engineers in China who designed and remanufactured the parts he needed. They came in here to San Diego by the boatload. He had a customs agent, and he made himself almost a millionaire.
Wait. But isn't that sad that he couldn't find a guy in the United States that could make these pieces? Isn't that sad?
It is, and I think the opportunity of a world currency can remedy that. Right now, there are two nations in the world who need each other more than anybody else, and that's China and the United States. The engineers in the United States, the reason you can't find one is because they're all working and they're all getting paid really well. China has a glut of engineers sitting around at Starbucks with nothing to do. So he was able to get this stuff done for pennies on the dollar compared to what he could have gotten it done here. The engineers, like I say, here are all employed. We can't find enough engineers. And the fact, it's sad that we don't have a relationship with China. Like if we need engineers here and they have engineers that need money, why can't we work that out? One of my favorite comedians, Brian Regan, years ago, had a joke about driving up the Pacific coast, and he noticed that there were log trucks driving south and log trucks driving north. He's like, well, why are you driving logs south if you're also driving logs north? But it's politics. It's politics that makes these things difficult. My point about my son was it was an example of free trade. It was a beautiful thing. There were no lawyers or accountants involved. It was just two people who trusted each other.
Okay, as a libertarian candidate, let's talk about drugs. What do we do with drugs and alcohol in this country?
So I don't believe that I or anybody has the right to tell you to control what goes into or comes out of your body. And ironically, one of the points I make is when the abortion question inevitably comes up in debates. I say, look, the 14th Amendment does not confer jurisdiction on a fetus. We have birth rights. So the operative term there is birth. So this is a political conversation that politicians have used to raise money, but the government has no business in that. It has no business telling you what you can and can't put into your body. And as a libertarian and as someone who hit bottom in his 20s, far be it from me to prevent you from engaging in behavior where you hit bottom. Every great story, the protagonist has that moment in the film that we love where he or she hits bottom, and then we find out what that protagonist is made of. And we're happy when that person reinvents themselves. They finally find their pain point, and they make a change, and they emerge better for the adversity. So far be it from me to rob you of that opportunity.
So Mark gets in the White House. You obviously would legalize marijuana. What do you do with drugs like heroin and ecstasy and cocaine? Do you green light that?
Well, these drugs that have been demonized, the reason they were demonized was because there was an enormous business in it. In 1865, one of the Civil War amendments, the 13th Amendment, says that we shall not have slavery or indentured servitude in the United States, but, unless you happen to be duly convicted. So there's your mass incarceration right there. So today we live in a country where prisons are traded on the stock market, right? So people like Felicity Huffman own that stock. so they can take the profits and bribe their little piece of shit and put them into a fancy school, right?
Right.
But the people who are selling the drugs who end up in prison, it is known to the government that the people who are going to take that chance and risk a mandatory minimum sentence of 5, 10, or 20 years in federal prison are people who are at risk. And we know who is at risk. It's young black men. And we know who is the easiest to convict. It's young black men. And I had the opportunity to experience that. I lived with 900 people in a federal prison for 15 months, most of whom were young black men. And they were doing a lot more time than I was for doing a lot less than I did. And that system is by design. If you sit down and you want to if you're a private prison, all you need to do is buy Congress, which is very easy to do. They come cheap. You can buy them by the dozen. You go down and you buy Congress. You get them to pass a law that makes it illegal for people to do stuff that they're going to do anyway. And what that does is it drives the price up. It creates a black market. It creates criminal gangs. And that plays right into the hands of all the people who make money prosecuting, arresting, shaking people down. So it's been a big down. It's been a big negative for our country to have the war on drugs. So obviously, I'm completely opposed to it. And all of these drugs that are criminalized would be decriminalized, and that's just the end of it. There's no reason for it to be. There's no reason for this prohibition. It doesn't work. It makes the prohibition makes the problem worse from the viewpoint of the citizen. It makes it better from the viewpoint of the authoritarians who made these laws, who benefit from them together with their friends.
Don't you think, though, if I could go get some cocaine over at the liquor store, so to speak, don't you think the unintended consequences of the availability of all drugs? Man, I don't even know where you go get cocaine. I don't even know who you'd go buy it from. But if it was in the store and I could pick it up next to my my vodka, wouldn't that be a bad plan for the United States?
It's not a plan for the United States. It's a choice that the individual makes. And I would simply argue that the idea that you're going to impose your sensibilities on the choices that somebody makes with regard to substances that they may or may not ingest, and that there's some inherent goodness in that, I think that is inherently bad. I think that that if we don't have control over our bodies, then we don't have property rights at all in the United States. I think it all starts with our body. I think that, in fact, the conversation about cocaine would be non-existent relative to the sort of conversations we're having now. And you
don't think that availability, though? I mean, it would be sitting in my house, and then my 8-year-old son, as he grows up and sees Dad doing a line of cocaine, going, "Oh, that's good," and then Dad's just not going to work as much because he's so tired from the night before because he stayed up all night. I don't know how you.
Yeah, I think that's an idea that has been assigned to us. There are certain drugs that have been prohibited now for 50 years, since the 70s. Nixon's chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, who used to be an advertising guy, literally wrote a memo to Nixon saying it's all about the blacks. This has always been racist from the beginning. It has created a new Jim Crow. It's created an institutionalized class of criminals. 1 in 3 black people have been to prison. And I can't think of any argument worse than that, than institutionalizing a system of slavery. I mean, if you look at the arc of slavery from 1865 to now, the Constitution was silent on slavery until the Civil War, and then it sanctioned slavery. So the upside is all we've done is move slavery from the private sector. It was an economic model in the private sector. Is now an economic model for the public sector with the prisons, and this is horrible. And I trust that people are going to teach their children what to do and what not to do. I trust that a lot more than I trust government. And I don't want to see people being sent to prison and having to go through their entire life with a felony conviction and all the collateral consequences of that because they were involved with some substance that was completely arbitrarily determined to be something you shouldn't ingest. Cocaine, I've never done cocaine. People who have done cocaine tell me it's amazing. And so if I'm Pfizer, I want cocaine to be illegal. I want it to be illegal. I don't want it to be cheap and available. I don't want to compete with cocaine. I don't want to compete with marijuana.
But then Pfizer would produce it. Why couldn't they?
Pfizer could then produce it, and they could, and it would be useful in a lot of medical situations if they did. Again, this idea that this is something that we should be focused on is especially when we're looking. You and I are both looking for ways to not spend money stupidly.
Right.
This is one of the ways we do it.
Didn't Portugal legalize or decriminalize most hard narcotics?
They've had real good luck with that. The other thing is how we're treated in a society because of the war on drugs. There are places in the South where you don't want to drive through those places at night. The cops will pull you over. They'll shake you down for nothing. And you'll forfeit your car if you happen to have, if you're traveling with $10,000 in cash, it's presumed that you're a drug dealer.
Right.
That's the country we live in, and so we all give up civil liberties for the war on drugs in ways that have just become normalized. There's nothing so messed up that it can't become normalized. I mean, the Trump administration and the Obama administration, they kidnap babies from refugees and asylum seekers at the southern border, and they put them in old shut down Walmarts. They lose the babies, and then the adults who are seeking asylum because they happen to live in Guatemala, which is perfect for growing drugs that rich Americans want. A lot of the drug dealers I was in prison with 30 years ago from D.C., they were selling drugs up on Capitol Hill. They're selling drugs to dentists and doctors and accountants and lawyers. They're running their business like IBM. And they think they're good to go until one of these people gets in trouble with the feds and rats them out, and then they got to go to jail for 10 years for selling people drugs that they want to use. It's crazy. Yeah,
I just don't know how you would do that. And the only reason I say this I'm
not saying it's an easy sell. Not in this country.
No, I know you're not going to be able to sell it. I know that, but even if it was established that we would do this, if you just look at the harm, just say the drug of choice, alcohol, does to a country, I don't think introducing more substances that everyone would have availability to is going to be a good thing. So, but based
on your argument, we should prohibit alcohol.
We should, but we're not. That's the that's the one we said that's fine, that we can do that one. Yeah.
Well, they actually there was a constitutional amendment making it possible, and then when it didn't work, they had to amend the Constitution again to prohibit the prohibition. So prohibition doesn't work. That's the bottom line. Even if it is a good idea, it doesn't work. If you were to prohibit firearms in the United States, it would just drive up the price of firearms.
But that's in the Constitution, though. That's a different issue, though. It's a different issue.
So is selling alcohol in the Constitution now. Yeah. There's a constitutional amendment that makes it legal, just like the Second Amendment makes it legal to sell firearms. So it's just one. It's normalized to be able to own a firearm and drink. In fact, where I'm from in Vermont, you would do both at the same time. You get a 6-pack and a rifle and head up into the woods and hunt deer. And if you had a cousin you didn't like, you'd invite him to go along with you, and you'd shoot him during deer season. And say, "I thought he was a deer." Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's what happened with Dick Cheney, right?
Yeah, exactly. Shot his lawyer in the face. Yeah.
There's a joke there somewhere. I know there is.
Yeah. There have been many.
So I have a campaign idea for you. As you're running, you're going to build a border wall, but you're going to get China to pay for it. If Mark becomes president, what will he do with the border? What does he do?
Well, I don't favor absolute open borders, but I do favor managing to the reward, not the risk, managing to the opportunity, not the adversity. So, again, my reference point is being an entrepreneur, and relying on myself and innovation. So I don't know about you, but when I see people, when I see a family armed with a stroller and a 3-year-old, and they manage to walk 500 or 600 or 700 miles with $50 in their pocket from Guatemala, and they present themselves at the southern border, I see nothing but opportunity with those people. I want to find a way to make it possible for those people to become citizens. So I would advocate partnering up with private sector organizations, and I would say, hey, Nike, how about we give these people some shoes? And I'd say, hey, Old Navy, how about we give these people some clothes? And I would say to people who own apple orchards in Washington are always looking for workers, I'd say, how about we give these people some jobs, and how about we give them an opportunity to be successful in the United States, because they've already shown themselves to be very successful and innovative and entrepreneurial in just surviving that horrendous journey that they walked through, just surviving all the criminals that want to take them out. I mean, it's an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said there. So if you become president, no border wall, zero, or?
Well, a wall is prehistoric. You know, we still put people in cages, and that's so 16th century. That's so King George III. It's like or King George, whatever the number. It's prehistoric. We have technology now. You know, our cat has a chip. If the cat runs away, we know where the cat is. So, you know, if it ended up being a compromise that there's some sort of tracking to help people the first year. You say, I don't know, you're gonna pick apples in Washington, and your kids are gonna go to school, and you need to learn English because that's gonna make you successful, and then you're gonna know 2 languages. You're gonna know your version of Spanish and English. That's gonna make your family more successful here because we need that.
So how many people would you let in per year? Give me a number. Like, what's the right number?
Well, under a Whitney administration, you wouldn't have refugees and asylum seekers at the border because there would be no war on drugs. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
These people are at the border because of the war on drugs. That's why they're there. So you get rid of the war on drugs, and the refugees and asylum seekers go away. They don't want to leave their country. I mean, imagine what normal life is when you wake up and you decide that the right answer is to take the $100 that you have and a stroller and your children and start walking to the United States border. It's 500 or 600 miles away. That means that you've probably got a 13-year-old kid who is now old enough to join the cartel that controls your country. And if he doesn't join that cartel, he's going to be dead. So you're walking 700 miles to the United States to seek a better opportunity. That would come to an end under a Whitney administration, because I would use the brickbat of declassifying state secrets to get the war on drugs repealed.
So you're not for open borders. I want to be clear about that, correct, as a libertarian?
Yeah, I think so in an ideal world, there would be no borders. We would all just be one people and we would all get along. But we do have borders. I think that the discussion around borders has been the wrong discussion. Trump's view of borders is prehistoric and Neanderthal. The real borders we need to defend are our digital borders. You and I right now are engaged in an act of citizen journalism, and citizen journalism is threatened not by the government, but by private sector tech companies, Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Apple. They have the ability and are using the ability to censor via algorithm political opinions that do not happen to comport with those held by Rachel Maddow and Sean Hannity. That's something that's going on right now. It is silent. You can't see it. It's similar to the coronavirus in that regard. And this is one of the things that got me off the couch. I produced a very successful podcast for 4 years called Late Night Last Week, wherein I recapped the previous week's late night monologues and had a lot of very harsh things to say about my government. And then one day I look up about 1.5 2 years ago, and these tech companies get together, and they, on the same day, they removed Alex Jones from their platforms. So as a citizen and as a libertarian, I don't have a test for what Alex Jones is saying, whether I agree with him or disagree with him. I just know that Alex Jones never once ran afoul of the First Amendment, not even close. And that is the principle that I want to see upheld by these private sector tech companies.
Wait. But he did say some pretty crazy things about Sandy Hook that
absolutely
he had to walk back.
Why we have a First Amendment is to protect that.
Yeah.
So Alex Jones is free to say crazy things and distasteful things about Sandy Hook. Every landmark First Amendment case in the United States involves people like Larry Jones, the Hustler case, Larry Flint. it being Kathy Griffin is another person I defended. She had to go out and hire a First Amendment lawyer. She was getting pulled over. The Trump administration put her on the Interpol list, and she was getting detained in every country she visited. She would literally have to be climbing the White House fence with that effigy of Trump's head in her hand to violate the First Amendment. She didn't even come close. But here we are now. The federal courts have been pretty good about unfettered political speech. But people are getting censored off the internet. And I've said this to my party. I don't want to live in a world where the Republicans and Democrats have unfettered access to the efficient distribution that these platforms offer, and the Libertarian Party is reduced to posting 8.5 by 11 flyers on the community bulletin board. This is an existential threat to my party, but more than that, it is an existential threat to unfettered, absolute freedom to speak politically about your government peacefully. It has to be peaceful by definition. That is a key. So you can't incite violence. You can't invite people to cross state borders and engage in riots. But if you're just giving your opinion, no matter how distasteful it may be, that is legal in the United States. We don't have a problem with the government violating that. The problem now rests with these private sector companies who all the money I've made basically the last 25 years has been in tech. I sell an algorithm. That's literally what I do for a living. And that's what my company does. These companies are immune from being sued. They have a special law that keeps us from being able to sue them. They bought that law from Congress fair and square. And then the license agreements that we sign, what do we do when the terms of service that we sign conflict with the terms of citizenship? We agree to binding arbitration if we don't like what they do. The Supreme Court says if you sign an arbitration agreement, you can't participate in a class action. And then the agreement we signed says they can remove us for any reason or no reason at all. So we literally are agreeing right now by contract to allow them to censor us. And I believe that I don't care who is violating the principle of uncensored political speech in the United States, whether it's the government or a private sector organization that's immune from lawsuit. I want to see that principle upheld. I believe we need a constitutional convention to have a digital constitution that modernizes our Bill of Rights so that we're protected from this sort of arbitrary and capricious conduct.
So then, like, we're using Alex Jones as the example. I mean, then do you think YouTube, for example, should be forced to carry Alex Jones even though they find it disturbing?
I think platforms like YouTube need to make a choice about whether or not they're going to carry political speech. If they're going to carry political speech, then that includes Alex Jones. If you're not going to carry political speech and you're just going to put up people who make YouTube videos of themselves doing drum solos and putting on makeup, well, then do that. But if you're going to carry political speech, then you carry all political speech. You don't get to decide what political speach you carry.
No matter what they're saying. Okay.
Well, especially no matter what they're saying, because if I was a criminal defense lawyer, right, it would be a great day for me to be able to defend a Nazi and his ability to march down the street and say Jews will not replace us.
Right.
If that Nazi has that right, then I know I'm never going to have a problem, and I know that I can compete at a high level and use whatever tools I want to use as a storyteller and someone who engages in hardcore political rhetoric to express my opinion so that we the people can engage in this experiment of self-government and self-determination and ultimately self-respect. That's what the United States is all about, and it's why the United States is such a great sandbox that invites us to start and create companies and do things and use all of our creativity, everything we can bring to the forefront. It all depends on knowing that we don't have to censor ourselves before we sit down at a piece of paper and try to come up with a new idea.
Well, you're talking about censoring. Does it bother you that the president, Donald Trump, when a reporter stands up and asks a legitimate question, he pounces on them? Do you like that? Is that how you're going to run your campaign?
Well, I wouldn't do it that way. I think, but when you're talking about a press conference, look, here's what I think about Donald Trump. Whatever else can be said about Donald Trump, no president, to my mind, I've been around since 1959, has ever been more accessible to the press. The guy gets up there 2 or 3 hours a day and runs his mouth. He goes out and when he got rid of having a formal press secretary, it was because he wanted to do his own press conferences. So you don't have that extra layer between Trump and the press that you used to have. So Donald Trump, in many ways, has really been the model. I would conduct myself in a very similar way. I would go out and talk to the press every day, and I would be criticized like Donald Trump is for the manner in which I decided to answer questions or not answer questions. But at the end of the day, there is no buffer between Trump and the press. So we're getting to see actually what the president thinks, how the president behaves, and then we, the people, get to make a decision come voting time whether or not we want to have 4 more years of that. That's how the system works.
So reporters standing up in the White House briefing room with Mark Whitney, if I ask a question you don't like, are you going to berate me and put me in my place?
I might say, that's a red herring. I talk about ending war on drugs, and you jump right to heroin. You're trying to marginalize me. You're trying to make me sound like a crazy person. I say the 14th Amendment doesn't confer jurisdiction over the fetus, and you're saying I hate babies. So we would have those. We would engage in rhetoric back and forth. I think Trump benefit. I think what Trump does is he goes to, when he doesn't have a good answer, he goes to being a bully. So he really is an empty vessel in many ways. He is the wrong person to be president. But compared to all the people he's been running against, the Democrats and Republicans, over the last 4 years and this year, he is head and tails above them in terms of his ability to conduct himself on his feet in front of an audience, standing alone on stage with no net, no place to hide. He's far better than any of them, and I would be that much better than him.
Well, and it's so interesting. The reporters just don't know what to do, and then, they get that sound bite, and then they run it that night, and okay, everyone sees it, and by the next day, there's 3 new things to talk about. You can't even remember what the president talked about a week ago, or what was being scrutinized by this administration. You got to give it to the guy in the sense of he just keeps throwing crap out there, and they don't know what to do.
Well, he also takes advantage of the world that that our corporate press has created. And I would say the same thing about the Democrats who ran this year. They have created a universe in which we have this thing called hate speech, and the citizenry is divided up into so many different subsets of identities that nobody can talk. So what the press and the Democratic candidates for president have in common is, at a macro level, they are always engaged in a public speaking competition with the incumbent president. But they live in a world where you can't express an opinion because you might offend a bunch of people. They're scared of Twitter. Yeah. They're scared of social media. They're scared of Facebook. And, they're scared of the simulation. Twitter and Facebook are not a thing. These are marketplaces, and the algorithms are optimized. If I go on Twitter and I talk shit about Taylor Swift, that algorithm is optimized to go find the person who loves Taylor Swift more than anything else and find the person who hates Taylor Swift more than anything else, because those are the 2 people who are most likely to comment and retweet or attack me. That's how they make money. It's a simulation. It's not real. And if you're in public life, you have to ignore all that crap and just put it aside.
Well, as a candidate, wouldn't you just tell the Democrats to just stop apologizing? Stop. I mean, just say what's on your mind and say it.
Yeah.
Don't you think they would do better that way?
Absolutely. I would tell them, look, this is a very corporate operation the Democrats and Republicans run. With the exception of Sanders, everybody else that ran for president as a Democrat, they belong in the back office running HR. There are no presidents there. And when they do say something on the merits, they say it wrong. I watched Kamala Harris, who was the top law enforcement officer in California. She was Attorney General here before she was a U.S. Senator. And she was attacking Elizabeth Warren because Elizabeth Warren wouldn't join her in calling for Twitter to remove Donald Trump from Twitter, to remove the president of the United States from Twitter. She was literally calling on Twitter to engage in censorship. Now, I think the Democrats have made a mistake in not embracing the Bill of Rights. I think that would really benefit them. I'm happy as a libertarian that is unclaimed territory. I perform my shows in big cities for Democrats and Republicans. My favorite city to perform is Washington, D.C. And because I have all the email addresses on all the lawyers in the country from my software company, when I go to D.C., I email the lawyers primarily at the Department of Justice. That's where most of them are. It's 40,000 of them down there. I say, hey, there's going to be a guy in town doing a show called Fool for a Client about how he beat your ass and got himself out of prison. You might want to come see that. So the prosecutors, about half of my audience in D.C. is prosecutors and their spouses. And by the end of the 90 minutes, I tell them my libertarian life story. I remind them of principles they forgot they believe. I remind them that they believe in free speech, that they believe in separation of church from state, that they believe in an absolute free press, that they believe we have the right to choose who we associate with and don't associate with. We have the right to protest our government, and that they are authoritarians and they're engaged in overkill. And it brings some of them to tears.
Mark, when I was a kid, California, where you're at, the Golden State, I think one of the prettiest and best states out there.
Amazing.
But when I was a kid, California was home to all the wackos. Every wacko in the world lived in California. Did you guys send them all to Florida? Is that what you guys did? Did they all?
It's a very corporate place. It's a very corporate, obedient place. Even in my party, the Libertarian Party, there's a real strong authoritarian streak. When you get people one-on-one, people are very libertarian. But when we get clustered on social media and stuff like that, we end up virtue signaling and so forth. But California is a one-party state right now. In most of our state elections, we don't do partisan voting here. So whoever the top two vote getters are in the primary are the people who run against each other in the general election. So it's usually two Democrats in the general election running against each other. And I don't know what it means to be a Democrat anymore. I don't know what it means to be a Republican, except to say that, from my point of view, it means zero tolerance. It means authoritarianism. It means iron fist. And to be a libertarian is the opposite of that. Our First Amendment, if you were to define those 46 words in one word, it's tolerance. When the First Amendment was written, there were people there who owned slaves, and there were people there who thought those people were the worst people, but they tolerated each other, and they decided that, the world has been made much more difficult by religions fighting among each other. So we're going to create a country where we don't have that. We're going to tolerate all religions or no religions. And here we are more than 200 years later, and, we do not have Muslims and Jews fighting in the street here. We don't have Catholics and reborn Christians fighting in the streets. They fight on Facebook. They do their own shows. They engage in peaceful political rhetoric. And I love that about the United States. I think it's worth preserving. That's why I'm running for president. But
isn't tolerance one of the problems of your state, California? You just go to the north of you. That homeless problem is out of control. I don't know how bad it is in San Diego. I know that city very well. But
we have a homeless population here as well. In fact, if you're going to be homeless, this is where you want to be. But the fact that we have people who are homeless in the United States is ridiculous. This is a very wealthy country, and unfortunately, it's so difficult for the private sector to provide solutions here. Every problem in the private sector is the opportunity for a new for-profit business, and I'm a big fan of that. But the government has a monopoly on homelessness, and it's economically impossible for the private sector to solve that problem. It's one of the things that too much government has incubated.
But do you think it's that hard to solve? In other words, one of the ideas I think the mayor of Los Angeles is doing is they're building, I don't know, $600,000 apartments with granite countertops, nice refrigerators, and they're going to build these for each homeless person.
There have been some models that show that that if homeless people have a place to live, that they'll be able to pull it together, and that ultimately is good for society.
Yeah, but do you need granite countertops? I mean, do you need a high-rise apartment? Do you need a swimming pool? I mean, isn't the solution, isn't this easy to solve? We need to build, mental health facilities for these people, sort of a community within a community, so that we can get them off the street. They've got to go. Because if I own a business in downtown LA, down the Gaslight District in San Diego, and I decide I want to put my tent in front of your coffee shop, are you telling me you don't have the right as that coffee shop owner to say, listen, dude, you crapping in the streets in front of my place, it's not good for business. What about the taxpayers? Don't they have a right?
Well, they do, and that's the funny thing about, that's the irony of homelessness. So the situation you described, somebody pitching a tent in front of your coffee shop, that's not allowed. But we do tolerate homelessness here in San Diego. It is, and there is an area of downtown in the city where it is tolerated, and it's not in front of the coffee shop. It's actually near the building where a lot of social services are provided. That's where most of the homelessness is downtown that you see. There's a lot of other homelessness, people living out in the canyons and in the mountains and literally just camping out until somebody finds them. But we do know, you mentioned mental illness. I have mental illness in my family. My dad was bipolar. My son is autistic. That's not a mental illness, but it's a management issue. And then there's the addiction. There's the alcohol and drugs. I believe there would be fewer addicts, fewer homeless people due to addiction if we did not have the war on drugs. So it comes back to that again. But people in the private sector would solve this problem if it were solvable in the private sector. It's not. The cities.
Well, I know it's solvable, because if you go to Beverly Hills, you're not going to pitch a tent in Beverly Hills, but you go in front of a yoga shop in downtown LA, they will not move that guy or that woman in that tent. They're afraid to do it. The leaders are afraid to do it because they feel, if I show up as a leader with the police and I start yanking these tents apart, that somehow they're going to lose votes and somehow they're going to lose their base over this, when in fact, you've got to make the streets safe for everyone.
Yeah, so I think what the private sector would do if there wasn't so much government involvement here, the private sector would find a way to pool resources and find the opportunity in this situation. My family and I were very close to homeless when I was in my 20s and lost everything. We were so close that it scares me to even think about it. I mean, we were down at the food shelf getting food and stuff like that for a little while, and we ended up living in this cottage for like 6 weeks because we just didn't have a place to live. I had no money. I'd been wiped out. We sold all of our furniture, and I just had all these cases to fight, civil, and then it was just, so it can happen to people who don't have any of these management issues around drugs or mental illness that we're talking about. If I was running for mayor, I would be a lot more competent to talk about the details of this issue than I am running for president.
Yeah, no, I understand. But let's agree you can't live on the street, so the taxpayers don't have to deal with that when they go to work.
It's bad for the people living on the street, and it's bad for everyone else. It's just a bad look. Yeah, it's like you're advertising you're a failed country or something. It's just a bad look. And we should have zero tolerance for it, and there should be solutions. And I just know intuitively that the reason there aren't there's money in these solutions for for-profit organizations and not-for-profit organizations to get together. It doesn't have to be charity. There can be incentives for people to get it together. Right. And it's very difficult to create that when the governmental hands are all over it, and it's a bad thing. San Francisco is especially, it's just, it's just I used to make a joke when I did stand up in San Francisco. You got a lot of people, in San Francisco out there on the sidewalk. I can't tell whether it's homeless or Bluetooth. A lot of people, no, the joke was a lot of people out there talking to themselves on the sidewalk. I can't tell whether it's homeless or Bluetooth.
Mark Whitney, you're an interesting guy. I like your perspective on life. I wish you well in the upcoming election or the next election, if there is an election.
Yeah, I will on November 4th, whether I'm president or not, I'm going to register to run again in 2024. I'm devoting the next 10 years of my life to making the Libertarian Party politically viable. It has a political viability problem. The party's 48 years old, and it has almost a perfect record of not getting people elected. So it's kind of like taking over a farm team, in baseball that just doesn't win.
Do you know who I thought was I don't know, real quickly, we got to go, but you know who I thought was a great candidate for you guys was Ron Paul.
Was who? I'm sorry?
Ron Paul.
I lost you.
Ron Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ron was great. Yeah, I got you. Ron Paul was a good candidate, with the exception that he was a Republican. So Ron brought a lot of people into the party. A guy named Harry Brown in '96 brought a lot of people into the party. But I would point out they didn't get elected. They're getting like 3% of the vote, 4% of the vote, something like that. And so there's an issue there. And it's juxtaposed against the great back end the Libertarian Party has. Like I said, we have access to the ballot in all 50 states. So it's really there's a comfort zone in the party that is getting 3, 4, 5%. That is winning to a lot of people. But politics is a game where there's one winner and everyone else ties for last. That's how I look at it.
Well,
and so a Libertarian president can change a lot of things for the better.
All righty, Mark, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
You, man, it was a pleasure. I appreciate it too.
We're out of here.
Okay, take care. Thanks.
No more Roach on Florida TV.